details about the situation on the front line, let's talk with our guest. Ihor Romanenko, founder of the charitable foundation We Will Close the Sky of Ukraine, Lieutenant General, is joining us live. Welcome.
A very good evening to you and to all of our viewers watching tonight.
Ihor Alexandrovich, let's start with the news that has been pleasantly encouraging for several days in a row. As much as possible, this is about Starlink. We see that Z-bloggers are outraged. We see that they're trying to find some way out of the situation, but there are practically none. In the sense of restoring communication via Starlink, how much is this already clearly visible and reflected in the nature and capabilities of the occupiers' offensive?
All the actions that were taken by representatives were organized, let's say, by the Ministry of Defense. In our case, led by the Minister of Defense with the involvement of specialists in this field, specifically Flesha Beskresny and other members of the team. This has definitely shown results. It became evident in the strikes carried out by the enemy, airstrikes on targets across the territory of Ukraine. Here they are no longer able to resolve issues or accurately target objectives as they did using Starlinks. Nor can they effectively bypass our air and missile defense zones. This does not mean that such actions have been completely eliminated. They still occur, but with worse results. This is very important. That is, we need to keep in mind that at one time within the Ukrainian Defense Forces, we were much more how we used to use them. Starlinks were legally used to solve these issues. And there were problems. We remember how SpaceX Max, when we used drones at sea, the Starlink connection would drop and our drones would be lost. In general, those were dark times. Now, those times have changed thanks to the appropriate work done. And regarding the facilities on the territory of Ukraine, this is how it looks. And even on the front line, even these small groups that infiltrate and so on, as a rule, to increase their effectiveness, the enemy accompanies them with their own drones. Moreover, sometimes they are deceived, meaning they are told to go to certain points along a specific route. There's no one there, they have to wait, and so on. If they happen to encounter someone there, they're reassured and told, those are our people, move closer. But in reality, sometimes they're even directed toward our own units that need to be attacked. And by the time they realize it, it's already too late for them. For these few soldiers, their only options are to fight, die, or surrender and be taken prisoner. So that's how they use these kinds of tactics. So the drones they're using there are also effective. They used Starlinks. And in this sense, their absence has made the situation worse. Again, this doesn't mean that everything is completely lost. Not for them, because there was a time when they were without Starlinks, yes, but everything that replaces Starlink, they are trying to restore it all now. But the results are worse, of a lower quality and much less effective than before. That's why the Russians, up to and including Putin himself, are making efforts, because Putin has tried several times and in some cases succeeded to have phone conversations with Musk. But that was quite a while ago. But we know how much he likes to do that. He influences Trump, and in general, he recently had a phone conversation with Xi Jinping and so on. So that's the situation here. On the one hand, this means that all the related indicators have clearly worsened, and that means management indicators. And when management efficiency declines, it means the enemy's effectiveness in conducting combat operations also decreases. That's very important. For us, this turned out to be insignificant. It turned out like this, with a decrease in some individual units. That is, some of the servicemen themselves had it. Privately, dedicated volunteers and our charitable foundations have been providing various military units with these essential items. So right now, the official process of legalization is well underway through the so-called official white lists. And that is both a good and a right development. That is, at the initial stage, there was differentiation in terms of the speed of the air attack assets that used Starlinks. As you can see, we're having some changes with the lighting here. I apologize, but that's just how we live.
We'll get things set up now and restore the connection with Ihor Alexandrovich Romanenko. and we'll talk in more detail. Here's the situation. The border guards of the Bilhorod-Dnistrovsky detachment held out in complete encirclement for more than 8 weeks, repelling assaults by the Russian Federation and eliminating the invaders. We're talking about the Huliaipole direction, where during this time Russian troops tried to break through the defense 10 times, using artillery and assault groups. However, they were unsuccessful. The Ukrainian defenders operated so covertly that the Russian assault troops didn't even understand where the fire was coming from. That's why the soldiers themselves have already nicknamed this section of the front the Bermuda Triangle. This is also one of the stories directly about the situation at the front, which shows that in the Huliaipole direction, Russian occupiers are using frontal assault tactics, concentrating a large number of Russian Federation troops there, and the main objective is simply to seize positions. It doesn't matter whether they come under fire or not, This tactic was also used in the Soledar direction and in the Bakhmut direction. Now, for the past 18 months, this tactic has also been maintained in the Pokrovsk direction. We've established a connection with our guest. Yes, Ihor, can you hear us?
Yes, there was a power supply switch over here just now, so I sincerely apologize.
It's nothing serious.
We all understand.
We live... Even despite such a situation, we can still speak the truth to the whole world. Now, let's talk in more detail about the Huliaipole direction. Just now, after analyzing both American institutes throughout the war and my own observations, I've come to the conclusion that in principle, the Russians' tactics do not change. They used to launch frontal assaults and they continue to do so. They rely on numbers, not on quality. Regarding the Huliaipole direction, could you elaborate separately? Could you share your observations and analysis?
So this approach, these action algorithms, this kind of tactics have been used before. They are aware of their advantage in terms of manpower, weapons, and equipment, and so without much effort, they tend to use such extensive approaches in conducting combat operations. As a rule, that doesn't mean they're all completely stupid and don't use other methods. That's not what I'm saying. What I mean is that for the most part, this is what happens. And generally speaking, it's not very effective, although one way or another they are advancing and slowly managing to seize more of our land. But this comes at a great cost in losses. And December and last January of this year showed that they reached what is called a balance, and even more than that, a balance. This means that the number of Russian armed forces personnel deployed is equal to what they have lost. And this is a very important point to consider, because just last year, General Alexander Siersky, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, explicitly stated that their primary goal was to form 14 new reserve divisions. They managed to create only half of that, 7. Of those, as you mentioned, they used the divisions in the most active combat areas, like the Pokrovsky direction, the Huliaipole direction, Kupiansk, and several other sectors. These are the kinds of intensive approaches they took. As for Zaporizhia, well, the 4 regions that Putin made a strategic priority, even illegally amending the constitution to claim these Ukrainian territories, have seen intensified fighting in Zaporizhia over the past few months. This is the Huliaipole area. In fact, they have captured Huliaipole and there are still separate battles taking place there. But overall, the fighting is now happening even beyond Huliaipole and the Orikhiv direction, which is even further west. So they are encircling Stepnohersk and fighting is taking place in Primorsk. And further north, they are making use of what remains along the bottom. They are advancing in this direction from the Kakovka reservoir. The situation there is quite difficult, but the strength of Ukraine's defense forces, as a rule, lies in using, let's say, not just a NATO-style approach to command, but now something that has evolved over 4 years of war. And also from previous experience since 2014. That is, it means giving lower-level commanders the opportunity to take initiative and carry out the tasks assigned to them. Of course, tasks are assigned to be completed, but in many ways, initiative is still left to the commanders. The Russians, since Soviet times, have had a very rigid vertical command structure, but it is less effective in combat operations. At certain stages, it works. when there are large numbers, when attacking head-on, as you mentioned, and when using such approaches. But overall, in the organization of military operations, this is noted not only by our experts, but also by Western experts and analysts. So of course, this kind of approach is more effective. That is, we need to use innovations, both in technology and in the tactical methods of employing this technology and weaponry.
Andrei Ilyich, yesterday I took the time, quite a while actually, but I roughly calculated how much the Russian Federation spent on the recent massive missile strike. So the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine published a complete list of what was launched at Ukraine. I found information on how much each item costs, added it all up, and it came out to $105 million. $700,000 were spent by the Russian Federation in just one attack. Just imagine, that's about $106 million. And that's only regarding the purchase of missiles. I'm not even talking about scrambling aircraft, deploying ships, salaries, and so on. Those are completely different expenses. The numbers would be colossal. But just in terms of missiles, it's $105 million. $105,700,000 to be exact. Is there any information in general about the reserves of the Russian army? Because as practice has shown, Zircons are mostly anti-ship missiles that Russia launches at Ukraine, and they are dated for the end of 2025. This suggests that they are most likely no longer in storage.
Moreover, there are indicators not only for missiles, but also for ship-based Zircons. The ones you mentioned, the Onyx missiles, are being used. They are less accurate against ground targets, but they still use them for that purpose. This indicates that there is a shortage of these missile weapons. Moreover, they are using anti-aircraft missiles from the S-300 and S-400 systems in a ground-to-ground mode. That is, the range of the S-300 is 120 kilometers, the S-400 up to 200 kilometers, and these are also not accurate. So if they had other options, and Putin is setting this task, why use these? Well, it means they're trying to worsen the situation with blackouts and everything else. You mentioned the data on Onyx missiles, the end of 2025, and other data show that the use of KHE-101 missiles with strategic bombers indicates they are coming straight off the assembly line. To put it simply, we noticed this specific feature almost as soon as it actually happened. It has only been about 2 short weeks into the start of this new year, and they have already discovered the physical remnants of these sophisticated KH-101 cruise missiles, which are typically launched from heavy strategic bombers. They were produced in the same year. This shows that they don't have any stockpiles, reserves, or special resources, and they are forced to use what they have. This is a very important trend, and it concerns offensive weapons. A separate topic is their air defense. It's not coping. Of course, we don't have enough. We need to further increase the capabilities of our missile strike systems. Scaling up is happening under very difficult conditions, but it is happening. So when it comes to their air and missile defense systems, they're already facing a shortage of anti-aircraft missiles, first of all. Secondly, with regard to radar stations, you often provide information in this area about Crimea, about military facilities, and so on. They're already experiencing a shortage. And what especially affects them painfully is the insufficient supply of foreign-made components and parts, which they use them in missile weaponry, aviation, radar, radiation stations, and so on. And even taking into account help from China and a number of others. After all, it's not just companies. Unfortunately, there are also American, French, Swiss ones, and so on. But it's not enough to be useful. After all, this is illegal, done through smuggling and so on. And they are forced, for example, in the latest missiles they made by the end of last year, and they continue this with strategic equipment to use only their own components. This leads to a decline in the quality of these missiles and a reduction in their quantity. So as we've analyzed together, we can see negative trends in all these areas for the Russian Federation. Of course, this doesn't mean, as we might wish, that everything has completely collapsed. For now, things haven't collapsed for them. But work in this direction is being purposefully carried out by Ukraine's defense forces and our allies. Well,
since dual-use goods, the so-called Putin's mail, which was shut down in Germany, are those channels through which they still manage to get at least something for their weapons of death. Thank you very much for joining us and for this conversation, Igor. Romanenko, the founder of the charitable foundation We Will Close the Sky, was with us live on the Freedom Channel.